Close your eyes for a second and picture Iran. What did you see? Most likely a burning desert, crowds dressed in black, angry faces, something dangerous pulled straight from the evening news. Now brace yourself, because almost everything you just pictured is wrong. The real Iran is one of the oldest civilizations on the planet, older than almost everything we think of as ancient. It's a country travelers come home from in shock, not from danger, but because strangers kept inviting them in, pouring them tea, and refusing to take their money. It's a people who aren't Arabs at all and don't speak a word of Arabic. A land where one of the world's oldest Jewish communities lives side by side with Muslims, where filmmakers win Oscars, and where scientists launch satellites into space. And between the Iran on the news and the Iran where more than 80 million real human beings actually live, there is a canyon. Today we're going to build a bridge across it. I've gathered the 35 most stubborn myths about Iran, and we'll take them apart, calmly, by the facts, with no political spin and no side to sell. And we'll keep one thing straight the whole way through. The government and the ordinary people are not the same thing, not even close. We'll start with the most insulting, most viral mix-ups about Arabs, veils, and camels, and work our way to the genuinely surprising. Why a supposedly backward country flies to space, what Iranians really think about Americans, and why their single biggest holiday has nothing to do with Islam at all. Stay with me to the second half. That's where it all flips. 35 myths, one after another. Let's go. Myth number 1. Iranians are Arabs. Let's open with the mistake that offends Iranians more than almost any other. Calling an Iranian an Arab is a bit like mixing up a Spaniard with a German or a Russian with a Chinese person. These are different peoples with different roots, languages, and history. Iranians are, at their core, Persians, a people of the Iranian branch of the vast Indo-European family. In terms of language, that actually puts them closer to Europeans and Indians than to Arabs, who belong to an entirely different Semitic group. The very word Iran comes from an ancient term meaning land of the Aryans, the Iranian peoples. Persia had its own distinct civilization thousands of years before the Arab world took the shape we know today, with its own empires, religion, art, and script. The confusion comes from a simple shortcut. Iran is a Muslim country in the Middle East, and in the popular imagination, Middle East automatically equals Arab. But religion and ethnicity are two different things. You can be a Muslim without being an Arab. In fact, most Muslims worldwide aren't Arabs at all. Iranians adopted Islam, but they never became Arabs. They kept their language, their identity, and an enormous pride in their pre-Islamic Persian heritage. Here's how deep that difference runs. Persian language and culture were the language of courts and poetry far beyond Iran's borders, at the courts of India's rulers, among the Ottoman elite. Persian words seeped into everything from Turkish to Hindi and Urdu. Rather than dissolving into the Arab world after adopting Islam, the Persians largely shaped the culture of the entire Islamic East, its poetry, its miniature painting, its architecture, its science. And the spring festival, Nowruz, which we'll come back to, unites Iranian peoples from the Caucasus to Central Asia, but not the Arab world. This is a separate civilization, full stop. So, no, Iranians aren't Arabs. Persians are Persians, and they feel that different. Which brings us straight to the next myth, about their language. Myth number 2. People in Iran speak Arabic. If so many people think Iranians are Arabs, the second assumption follows naturally. Surely they speak Arabic. Wrong again. Iran's national language is Persian, also called Farsi, and it isn't a dialect of Arabic. It's a completely separate language from the Indo-European family, a distant cousin of European and Indian languages, not of Arabic. The two sound different, their grammar is different, and an Arab and an Iranian can't understand each other without special study.
One detail keeps the confusion alive: the writing.
After adopting Islam, Persians borrowed the Arabic alphabet and added a few letters of their own, so a Persian text looks like Arabic at a glance, the same flowing script right to left. That makes them seem like one language from the outside. But that's like saying English and Turkish are the same language because they both use the Latin alphabet. The script is shared. The languages are not. Persian does contain many Arabic loanwords, the way Russian is full of French borrowings or English of Latin ones, but that doesn't make it Arabic. And weigh what this language actually is. Persian was an international language of culture and diplomacy across a huge stretch of the world, from India to the Balkans, for centuries. The great poets who wrote in Farsi, Ferdowsi with his Epic of Kings, Rumi, whose verses are among the most widely read on earth today, Hafez, Saadi, Khayyam, are a foundation of world literature. For an Iranian, poetry in the mother tongue isn't a dusty relic. It's living, everyday pride. So, they speak Arabic in Iran is a myth. They speak Farsi, a separate language with a 1,000-year literary tradition, simply written in letters that resemble Arabic. Next up is the most visual and most contested myth of all. Myth number 3. All Iranian women wear black chadors and have no rights. In the popular imagination, the Iranian woman is a faceless figure wrapped head to toe in black, stripped of any rights. The reality is more complicated and, honestly, more contradictory. So this one calls for care. Let's start with the honest part. Yes, since the 1979 revolution, the headscarf, the hijab, is mandatory. The rules are real, and for a long time, a dedicated morality police enforced them. This is one of the rawest, most painful subjects in the country, one that has repeatedly sparked mass protests. Pretending these restrictions don't exist would be dishonest. But the image of everyone in identical black chadors is false. The chador is only the most conservative option, and plenty of women don't wear it. In big cities, especially among the young, huge numbers of women wear bright, loosely draped scarves pushed halfway back on their heads, fashionable clothes, makeup, constantly testing the line and pushing it. Iranian fashion, beauty, and attention to appearance are a whole living culture of their own. And no rights collides head-on with the facts. Iranian women drive, and always have. They vote. They work as doctors, engineers, lawyers, scientists, entrepreneurs, and, to many people's surprise, they make up the majority of university students. Legal inequality in certain areas is real, and the restrictions are real. But alongside them stands a highly educated, active society of women who fight for themselves. And for the full picture, Iranian women have given the world figures of the highest rank. An Iranian was the first and, to date, the only woman ever to win mathematics' highest honor, a peak no woman had reached in the entire history of the field. Another Iranian won the Nobel Peace Prize. It's also worth remembering the history. Before the 1979 revolution, life was noticeably more secular and free, so today's restrictions belong to a particular era rather than to some eternal nature of the place. Which is exactly why the subject stays so charged. A society full of strong, educated women lives under rules that many of them openly challenge. So the truth here is double. Real restrictions that can't be ignored, and women who are anything but powerless, anything but identical. A single black chador doesn't come close to describing the picture. Next, the character of the Iranian people themselves. Myth number 4. Iranians are angry fanatics who hate foreigners. Political headlines and footage of rallies paint a grim, hostile nation ready to burn any outsider with a glare. Nearly everyone who actually goes to Iran tells the exact opposite story. and it's probably the most pleasant surprise in this entire video.
Iranians are world famous for their hospitality.
Here, it's practically a religion of its own. They have a special tradition of elaborate courtesy called tarof, a delicate dance of mutual politeness, where a host insists on feeding you and a shopkeeper might refuse your money at first, purely for the sake of good manners. Travelers report the same thing over and over. Total strangers strike up conversations on the street, invite them home for lunch, pour tea, help them find the way, hand them gifts, and flatly refuse anything in return, simply out of warmth toward a guest.
It's worth understanding tarof because it's the key to the Iranian character.
Under its rules, a taxi driver or shopkeeper may, out of courtesy, first refuse to take a guest's money, and you have to gently insist on paying. A host will keep piling the best pieces onto your plate even as you protest. A guest in Iranian culture is treated almost as a gift, a blessing, and to feed, shelter, and see them off well is a matter of honor. Travelers tell stories of being invited, total strangers, to stay the night, fed dinner by an entire family, and sent off with presents, all with no ulterior motive, just the ancient reflex of welcome. Here's the thing that explains it. You have to separate the state from the people. Official rhetoric is one thing. The mood of ordinary Iranians is another entirely. Many Iranians, especially in the cities, are strikingly warm and open toward foreigners, including citizens of the very countries their government calls enemies. To them, a guest is a guest, politics aside. So, angry fanatics who hate outsiders may be the single most unfair myth on this list. The reality is that Iran regularly tops travelers' personal rankings as the country with the friendliest people on earth. Now, what does this place actually look like? Myth number 5. Iran is nothing but scorched desert and camels. The Middle East, in the imagination, is sand to the horizon, and Iran gets painted as the same baking wasteland. That picture describes only a slice of the country and ignores the rest of its startling variety. Deserts do exist in Iran, vast arid stretches spread across the center. But Iran is, above all, a land of mountains. Powerful ranges cut across it, the Zagros in the west and the Alborz in the north, their peaks snow-capped for much of the year. And here's the fact that breaks the stereotype. There are fully operational ski resorts right above Tehran, where people drive up to hit the slopes in winter. Yes, skiing in Iran, a couple of hours from the capital. Now for the truly unexpected. Along the Caspian Sea in the north runs a belt of genuine humid subtropical forest, green, rainy, dotted with rice paddies and tea plantations. This region looks nothing like a desert and feels closer to something Mediterranean or Caucasian. There's coastline in the south, fertile valleys, high mountain lakes. Camels do turn up in the desert regions, of course, but that's one detail on an enormous palette. A few concrete points to make the contrast real. Rising above Tehran is Mount Damavand, the highest peak not just in Iran but in the entire Middle East, over 5,500 meters, capped with snow. The Caspian forests in the north are ancient relic woodlands, recognized as a natural heritage of humanity, wet and green where it rains and tea grows. And in the southeast lies the Lut Desert, where one of the highest surface temperatures ever recorded on the planet was measured. One country, and inside it, ski slopes, rainforest, and one of the hottest spots on Earth. So, nothing but desert and camels is a myth. Iran is a country of contrasts. Snowy mountains and ski runs, green Caspian forests, deserts and seacoasts all at once. And now for the one people mix up more than any other. Myth number 6. Iran and Iraq are basically the same thing. Their names sound alike. The countries are neighbors. Both sit in the Middle East, and in a lot of minds, Iran and Iraq blur into a single blob. In reality, they are two completely different countries, and confusing them is a serious mistake. Start with the people and the language, as we've already covered. Iran is fundamentally Persian, speaking Farsi, an Indo-European language. Iraq is mostly Arab, speaking Arabic. Ethnically and linguistically, these are different worlds. The religious makeup, the history, the culture all differ too. Behind Iran stands a 1,000-year Persian heritage. Behind Iraq, an Arab and Mesopotamian one. What's more, these two aren't twins. They're historical rivals. In the 1980s, Iran and Iraq fought one of the longest, bloodiest wars of the late 20th century, one that cost hundreds of thousands of lives on both sides. To picture them as the same thing is like merging two countries that actually went to war with each other. Let me finish the point on that war so the difference lands for good. The 8-year Iran-Iraq war killed, by various estimates, around 1 million people, involved chemical weapons, and became one of the most brutal conflicts of the late 20th century, a deep wound for both nations, not a minor neighborly spat. Add different currencies, different capitals, a different ethnic and religious makeup, different everyday alphabets, and it's clear Iran and Iraq have barely more in common than any two neighboring but distinct countries. All that links them is how alike the names sound to a foreign ear. So Iran and Iraq are the same is a stubborn but crude myth. They're two different countries that literally fought a war against each other. Now let's go deep into the centuries, to the question of just how old this civilization really is. Myth number 7. Iran is a young, backward country. Because of the image of a poor, closed-off country on the news, it's easy to assume Iran is something recent and insignificant. This is probably the deepest misconception of all, because it turns reality on its head. This is one of the oldest continuous civilizations on the planet.
Persian civilization goes back several thousand years.
2,500 years ago, the Persian Empire stood here, one of the first and largest world powers in history, stretching from Egypt to India. Its founder, Cyrus the Great, is remembered not only for his conquests, but for a famous document many call one of the world's first charters of human rights, a text proclaiming religious tolerance and respect for conquered peoples. The empire's capital, Persepolis, still stuns visitors with its ruins.
Persia gave the world an enormous contribution to mathematics, astronomy, medicine, architecture, and poetry. Great scholars worked here whose writings were studied for centuries in both East and West. Whole layers of world culture trace back to this place. What we mistake for backwardness is a relatively recent stretch of hardship and isolation, not the essence of a country with a history running back thousands of years. Some specifics, since this is the heart of it. The famous Cyrus Cylinder, a clay document from that very empire, sits today in the British Museum, and it's often called one of the first declarations of rights and tolerance. The Persian scholar Avicenna wrote a medical work that doctors studied in both East and West for centuries. Khayyam wasn't only a poet, but an outstanding mathematician and astronomer. The word algebra and whole branches of mathematics are tied to scholars of this region. What looks like backwardness is a short episode by historical standards, not the nature of a civilization standing at the very source of science and statehood.
So, a young, backward country is a historically short-sighted myth. Iran is older than almost everything we consider ancient, and it stands at the very origins of world civilization. Which leads us to the confusion over the country's own name. Myth number 8. Persia and Iran are two different countries. Plenty of people genuinely believe there was once an ancient, mysterious Persia, and that Iran is some other modern country in its place. In fact, it's one and the same country, just under different names. Persia and Iran are two names for a single state. Persia is the name the outside world, above all the West, used for centuries. It came from Pars, one region of the country, home to the ancient Persian kings. But the people themselves always called their land Iran, land of the Aryans. In 1935, the Iranian government officially asked the rest of the world to use the country's own name for it, Iran. That's all. No country was replaced, only the name it's known by abroad changed. That renaming, in the eyes of the outside world, happened under the Shah in the 1930s, when the government formally asked other states to call the country by its native name. Persia never vanished from the culture, though. Persian poetry, Persian carpets, Persian cats all remain, and the body of water to the south is still called the Persian Gulf the world over, a name, incidentally, that still sparks disputes. So Persian is the cultural and historical face of the very same country that is politically called Iran. One civilization, two names, zero contradiction. So Persia and Iran are different countries is a myth. It's one state with two names. The external, historical one, Persia, and the native, official one, Iran. Now, the religion of this ancient land. Myth number 9. Iran has always been Islamic. Iran is so tightly linked with Islam that it seems as if it must have been Muslim forever.
But this land carries more than 1,000 years of pre-Islamic religious history behind it. And that history never left the country's cultural code. Long before Islam arrived, Persia's main religion was Zoroastrianism, one of the oldest monotheistic faiths in the world, the teaching of the prophet Zoroaster, with its sacred fire, its struggle between good and evil, its ideas of heaven, hell, and a final judgment. Many scholars believe Zoroastrianism influenced later world religions. For roughly 1,000 years, it was the state religion of mighty Persian empires. Islam reached Persia only in the 7th century with the Arab conquest, and the country gradually became mostly Muslim. And Iran became an Islamic republic in its current political form only very recently, after the 1979 revolution. In other words, the Islamic State, as we understand it today, is a matter of the last few decades, not of eternity. And the pre-Islamic heritage is alive. In the city of Yazd, a Zoroastrian temple guards a sacred fire said to have been kept burning for around 1,500 years, never once allowed to go out. Zoroastrianism's symbol, the winged figure of the Faravahar, has become one of the unofficial emblems of Iranian identity, worn as jewelry by people of all kinds of views. And Zoroastrian ideas of the battle of light and darkness, of a final judgment, of heaven and hell, are thought by many scholars to have shaped later world religions. This isn't museum piece antiquity. It's a living root of the culture. So, Iran has always been Islamic is a myth. Behind the Islam here lies a 1,000-year layer of Zoroastrian and ancient Persian history, and today's Islamic State is comparatively young. Which brings us to just how religious Iranians themselves actually are. Myth number 10. All Iranians are fanatically religious Muslims. Since it's an Islamic republic, it seems logical that the population must be uniformly, fervently devout. The reality is far more mixed, and in many ways it runs against the official facade. Yes, most Iranians are Muslims, predominantly Shia, and Shiism is the state religion, which sets Iran apart from its Sunni Arab neighbors. Faith is woven deep into the culture. There are sincerely and profoundly devout people, holy cities, mass religious traditions. That's all true. But everyone's a fanatic is not. Iran is a society of wildly varying religiosity, and that's especially visible among its huge, educated urban youth. Many Iranians observe the rituals only formally, or not at all, live thoroughly secular lives, and are openly critical of religion imposed from above. The contrast within the country is striking. There's the city of Qom, a spiritual center with the largest seminaries. And there are the secular districts of Tehran, where young people live a lifestyle barely distinguishable from any world capital. Independent surveys of Iranians living inside the country have repeatedly shown a surprisingly high share who call themselves non-religious, doubting, or outright non-believers, and very low mosque attendance among the young. State-mandated religiosity and personal faith have drifted apart here far more than an outsider would guess, looking at the official facade.
So the nation of fanatics is a myth that confuses the state's signboard with the actual human beings. Iran's real religiosity runs the full range, from the deeply devout to the entirely secular. Next, the country's religious diversity. If you've made it this far, it only gets more interesting from here. We've cleared away the myths about people, language, and history. Next up, religion, laws, and freedoms, the areas surrounded by the most fear. And right after that, we dive into the second half, where we crack open what the news keeps quiet: space, cinema, technology, and what Iranians truly think of the West. Keep going. Myth number 11. There are no other religions in Iran besides Islam. The image of a strict Islamic republic leads to the conclusion that every other faith must be stamped out and simply non-existent. In fact, other and very ancient religious communities live in Iran officially.
The country's constitution recognizes several religious minorities, and there are even seats reserved for them in parliament. First, the Zoroastrians, descendants of that pre-Islamic faith we discussed, with their fire temples. Second, Christians, above all, the ancient Armenian and Assyrian communities, with churches standing calmly in Iranian cities. And, to many people's surprise, Iran is home to one of the oldest Jewish communities in the world, living here since antiquity, with working synagogues and its own representative in parliament. By its number of Jews, Iran is one of the largest countries in the region outside Israel. You can touch this diversity all over the country. Isfahan has an entire Armenian quarter with a magnificent Christian cathedral where local Armenians have worshipped for centuries. In Yazd, mosques stand beside Zoroastrian shrines. Synagogues operate in Tehran and other cities. And an honest caveat, not everyone in Iran has it equally good. The Baha'i community, for example, is not officially recognized and faces persecution, and that should be said plainly. But the centuries-long presence of Christians, Jews, and Zoroastrians with official status completely dismantles the myth of religious uniformity. Verdict? Iran is an ancient land where, alongside the Muslim majority, Christians, Jews, and Zoroastrians have coexisted for centuries. Next, the harshness of the law. Myth number 12. In Iran, they execute people for everything. Iran has a reputation for an extremely harsh penal system, and out of it grows the image of a place that puts people to death for practically any offense. This is a serious subject, and it deserves honesty, without exaggeration in either direction. The honest part? Yes, Iran applies the death penalty, and by the number of executions carried out, it is, sadly, consistently among the world's leaders, often second only to China, according to international human rights organizations. It's applied for serious crimes, but also, to international criticism, for drug-related offenses and a range of other charges. A large share of executions has fallen on drug cases, which is exactly what drew the most criticism. In some periods, the authorities softened those laws and reduced such executions. In others, they tightened them. This is a heavy subject, and stepping around it would be dishonest. But the image of everyone executed for anything is an exaggeration. Tens of millions of Iranians live ordinary daily lives and never brush up against this. The death penalty is applied under specific, serious statutes, not for everyday trifles. The system is severe toward certain grave crimes,
It does not put an ordinary person to death over a small mistake. So the verdict is, capital punishment in Iran is a real and serious problem that can't be brushed aside, and the country is among the world's leaders in the number of sentences. But they execute you for everything still doesn't describe the daily life of ordinary people. Next, alcohol, and an unexpected story about wine. Myth number 13. There's no alcohol in Iran, and they've never even heard of wine. Since it's an Islamic republic, it seems obvious. Prohibition and no wine culture could possibly exist there. The irony is that this very land is one of the cradles of wine in human history. Start with the history that shatters the stereotype. The Iranian city of Shiraz was for centuries associated with winemaking, and Persian poetry is soaked in images of wine. The great poets Iranians revere, Khayyam, Hafez, sang of the wine and the cup as symbols of life's joy and of spiritual intoxication. Wine is part of the deepest cultural code of Persia, long before any ban, now the present. Yes, since the 1979 revolution, alcohol is forbidden for Muslims. It's not sold openly, and violations carry penalties. But it doesn't exist and no one's heard of it is false. For one thing, recognized religious minorities, Christians, for example, are allowed to make wine for their own use. For another, there's a vast underground trade. People make homemade wine and spirits and get alcohol unofficially, a widespread, if illegal, part of private life, especially in the cities. In fact, so much homemade spirit is brewed that poisonings from bad moonshine make the news periodically, a grim but telling sign that prohibition isn't really prohibition at all. So, no alcohol and no idea what wine is doubly a myth. Iran is the historic home of a famous wine heritage and of poetry about wine. And today, despite the official ban, alcohol lives on in the private, underground sphere. Next, women again, but from a different angle. Myth number 14. Women in Iran can't drive, work, or study. We've touched on rights already, but this specific belief deserves its own moment because it's often confused with the situation in certain neighboring countries. In Iran, the picture is different. Iranian women drive, and always have. It was never banned here, unlike the long-standing rule in one neighboring state. Women work across every field: doctors, engineers, teachers, lawyers, scientists, officials, entrepreneurs, athletes, filmmakers. Women vote and run for office. And in education, something happens that astonishes many people. Women make up around half, and in some years the majority, of Iran's university students, and pour into the sciences and technical fields. At the same time, an honest caveat: legal and social inequality is real. Restrictions in certain professions, inequality in a number of family and legal matters, a mandatory dress code, limits like the long-standing ban on women attending some sports stadiums. All of it is the subject of genuine struggle and debate inside the country. It's especially important not to lump Iran together with some of its Arab neighbors. In one nearby monarchy, women were banned from driving for decades and only recently allowed, whereas in Iran there was never such a ban. Iranian women have driven all their lives. That's precisely because Iran is not an Arab country with a different code, but a Persian one, with its own history that included a distinctly secular, modern period before the revolution. So many of the horrors pinned on Iran are actually borrowed from entirely different countries and mechanically transferred onto it under the blanket label Middle East. So the truth is double again. Real restrictions and inequality on one side, women who drive, work, study, and form an enormous educated force in society on the other. Can't do anything is definitely not the Iranian woman. Next, the link to the outside world. Myth number 15. There's no internet in Iran. Since the country is closed off and under sanctions, it seems logical that there's barely any internet. In reality, Iran is a deeply wired digital country. Its internet just lives in a constant fight with filters. There is internet in Iran, and tens of millions of people use it, the young especially so. The problem isn't the absence of internet, it's censorship. The state blocks many foreign sites and services and is building its own domestic national network to keep traffic under control. Many of the world's most popular platforms are officially blocked, but here's the twist. Iranians are virtuosos at getting around those blocks. Circumvention tools, those familiar VPNs, are nearly universal in the country. An enormous share of the population uses them, and through them, people sit in the very social networks and messengers that are supposedly banned. One messaging app once amassed tens of millions of Iranian users and became a second nervous system for the country. People traded, read the news, and chatted on it, until it was blocked, after which everyone migrated en masse to VPNs and other apps. Iran has its own big answer to foreign marketplaces, a giant local online store, plus ride-hailing apps, delivery, homegrown social networks, and startups. Behind the wall of censorship, a full-blown digital economy hums. The state filters, society routes around it. An endless cat and mouse of shield versus sword. So, there's no internet in Iran is a myth. There's a massive, living internet under heavy censorship that users get around every single day. And that carries us into the second half, to technology. Myth number 16. Iran is a backward third world country with no technology at all. Between the sanctions and the isolation, it's easy to assume Iran is stuck somewhere in the last century technologically. The reality can surprise you. Under pressure and in isolation, the country has built up a remarkably developed science and industry. Start with the flashiest fact. Iran has its own space program. The country has independently put satellites into orbit on its own rockets and launched living creatures into space, something only a handful of states in the world can do. There's a developed missile program and a nuclear program that has become a subject of world diplomacy. And all of that demands a serious scientific and engineering base, which a backward country simply cannot have. Then there's what gets less airtime. Iran is strong in medicine. It performs complex operations, develops pharmaceuticals, works on stem cells, and patients travel from neighboring countries to see Iranian doctors. There's a whole medical tourism industry. To be concrete, Iran independently launched its first satellite on its own rocket around 2009, joining the narrow club of countries able to do so unaided, and it has sent living creatures into space as part of preparation for human flight. In medicine, one institute became a regional center for stem cell and reproductive research, and much of this grew because of the sanctions, not despite them. Cut off from imports, from medicines to machinery, the country was forced to build its own. Isolation meant as a noose, worked in places as an engine for homegrown science. So a backward country with no technology is a myth. Iran flies to space and develops medicine and science, and largely on its own, under pressure. Next, what this economy actually runs on. Myth number 17. Iran lives only on oil. Iran is a major oil power, and from that grows the image of a country that just pumps crude and amounts to nothing else. The picture is more complex, especially since sanctions long ago forced the economy to look elsewhere.
Iran's oil and gas are genuinely colossal. The country ranks among the world's leaders in reserves of both, and by natural gas, it sits on some of the largest deposits on the planet. But because sanctions strangled oil exports for years, the country learned to earn differently. Saffron, the most expensive spice in the world, comes almost entirely from here. Iran produces the overwhelming share of the global crop. In pistachios, it has spent years as the world's #1 or 2. Add Caspian black caviar, carpets, steel, petrochemicals, an auto industry, and agriculture. The economy is squeezed by sanctions and inflation, true, but it's far more varied than a single oil pipe. So, lives only on oil is a myth. Oil matters, but beside it stand industry, agriculture, and the famous carpets, pistachios, and saffron with which Iran feeds the world. Quick pause. Be honest in the comments. How many of these 17 myths did you believe yourself?
Half of viewers are sure of at least 5. And from here, it's the second half. And this is where the familiar picture of a backward, gloomy Iran falls apart for good. Coming up are the myths about Iranian engineers and coders, about cinema that wins Oscars, about nightlife, and about what Iranians really think of Americans. This is what it was worth staying for. Let's keep going. Myth number 18. Iranians are tech illiterate and uneducated. A direct sequel to the backward myth. If the country is third world, then surely its people are ignorant and untaught. This may be one of the furthest from reality beliefs of all, because Iran is a country with a genuine cult of education. Iranians are among the most educated peoples in the region. The country has a huge number of universities and students, and getting into the top schools is fiercely competitive. One technical university in Tehran is renowned as a forge of brilliant, world-class engineers, and its graduates are snapped up by the best companies and universities on the planet. Iranian schoolchildren and students regularly take medals at the international Olympiads in mathematics, physics, and computer science.
And the diaspora is the clinching proof. You can name the names. Iranian families produced the founder of one of the world's largest internet marketplaces, the head of a giant ride-hailing service, the first woman space tourist, leading engineers at space agencies, and professors at the planet's top universities. Tehran's leading technical school is often called the local equivalent of the world's most prestigious institutes, and its graduates land en masse at top foreign firms and labs. The flip side is precisely the brain drain we'll discuss later. A country producing this much talent loses some of it. But the sheer flood of brilliant minds buries the illiterate label for good. So tech illiterate is a myth flipped completely upside down. Iran is a country of engineers, mathematicians, and programmers with a cult of knowledge. Now, is there any joy or fun in this country at all? Myth number 19. There's no nightlife, no music, no fun in Iran. The image of a strict religious country conjures universal gloom. No music, no dancing, no entertainment, nothing but bans. The reality hides from outside eyes, but it's far more alive. Yes, the public sphere in Iran is restricted. There are no Western-style nightclubs, public concerts and dancing are tightly controlled, and women's solo singing in public is officially limited. That's true. But all the fun simply moved into private space. And there, it's in full swing. Behind the closed doors of homes and villas, Iranians throw parties with music, dancing, alcohol, and everything that's off-limits outside. Private life in Iran is a separate, free universe, hidden from the street. And the music lives. There's a rich tradition of classical Persian music. There's a huge popular music scene, part of it based in exile in Los Angeles, which Iranians jokingly call Tehrangeles. And from there, the songs stream back home to millions of listeners. There are legendary singers known across generations, and a powerful underground rap and rock scene whose tracks spread through the net. And poetry. For Iranians, this isn't a museum art, but a living, everyday passion. They know the verses of the great poets by heart, quote them at the dinner table, give them as gifts. An evening of poetry, music, and a shared table is a very Iranian scene. It just unfolds among family and friends rather than in a public square. So, no fun at all?
is a myth that sees only the street and misses private life. Behind closed doors, Iran sings, dances, and celebrates. Next, an Iranian art that conquered the world. Myth number 20. Iranian cinema doesn't exist, and if it does, it's primitive. It seems that in a country with this much censorship, serious film couldn't survive. In fact, Iranian cinema is among the most respected in the world, praised by critics and festivals across the planet. Iran's directorial school is a global phenomenon, the so-called Iranian New Wave. Iranian films regularly take top prizes at the world's biggest festivals, in Cannes, Berlin, Venice. One Iranian director has twice won the Academy Award for Best Foreign Language Film. Subtle family dramas in which a single private story lays a whole society bare. Another master of Iranian film took the top prize at Cannes. Iranian films about children, about divorces, about ordinary people have toured every major festival and sit on lists of the best cinema of the century. And here's the paradox. Some directors work under an outright ban and pressure at home, and still create masterpieces that go on to win awards around the world. The very restrictions taught Iranian filmmakers to say the greatest things through the smallest, with an almost documentary honesty. So, Iranian cinema doesn't exist, or it's primitive, is the reverse of the truth. Iran is a global film power, whose movies win Oscars and awe critics worldwide. Next, safety and war. Myth number 21. Iran is a dangerous war zone you can't travel to. Between the political headlines and the tension in the region, Iran registers in a lot of minds as a hotspot where a war is on, and it's dangerous even to show up. The experience of actual travelers clashes hard with that image. Contrary to the news picture, Iran itself is not a war zone, but a country with ordinary, peaceful daily life. And in terms of everyday safety for a tourist, it's considered one of the calmest in the region. Street crime is very low. Travelers say again and again that they felt remarkably safe in Iran, strolling through cities at night, and the most frequent incident is strangers insistently inviting them home and feeding them. Violent crime against tourists is rare. Seasoned travelers who've been all over the world often put Iran on their personal lists of the safest and friendliest countries, precisely because of that mix of low street crime and unbelievable warmth. Women who've blogged their way solo across the country describe feeling calmer than in many European cities. An honest caveat belongs here too. The political situation around Iran can be tense. There are periods of escalation, some border areas can be unsafe, and it's worth checking your own government's travel advisories before going. There's also a specific, separate risk, detention of dual nationals and journalists, tied to politics rather than to street crime. All of that is real, and there's no room for carelessness. But there's a vast difference between the country goes through political tension and it's at war and you can't go. The everyday life of Iranian cities runs its own calm course, so a dangerous war zone is a myth. With ordinary caution, Iran is a safe and astonishingly welcoming place to travel. Next, whether you can even get in. Myth number 22. It's impossible for tourists to get into Iran. Since the country is closed and under sanctions, it seems the door must be shut to travelers too. In fact, Iran receives tourists, and getting there is entirely doable. Iran has its own tourism industry, and for citizens of many countries, entry is fairly simple. For instance, through a visa you can get on arrival at the airport, or arrange in advance. Organized tours run too. And it's worth it. Iran is a treasure house of world-class sites. There's ancient Persepolis, the ruined capital of the Persian Empire. There's magical Isfahan, with its immense square, blue mosques and bridges, a city Persians called half the world. There's poetic Shiraz, with its gardens and the tombs of the great poets. There's the clay ancient city of Yazd, bazaars, palaces, caravanserais, deserts, and mountains. A little more on those treasures to make you want to see them. The square at the heart of Isfahan is one of the largest city squares in the world, framed by mosques with turquoise domes and an old bazaar. In Shiraz, there's a mosque famous for its stained glass, where the morning sun floods the interior with a sea of colored light. They call it the Pink Mosque. In Yazd, houses have been cooled for centuries by ancient wind catcher towers, with no electricity at all. By its number of UNESCO World Heritage Sites, Iran is one of the richest countries on Earth. The one real practical snag for a tourist: because of sanctions, foreign bank cards don't work, so you bring cash. Otherwise, the country is quite open. So, you can't get into Iran is a myth.
It's an accessible destination and one of the richest in sights anywhere, which serious travelers discovered long ago. Next, the way of life. Myth number 23. Iranians live like it's the Middle Ages. The image of a closed, religious country conjures an almost medieval way of life. The reality of an Iranian city is thoroughly modern, with its own quirks.
Picture Tehran concretely, a metropolis of many millions with high-rises, wide avenues, endless traffic jams, a metro, shopping malls, cafes, and restaurants. Iranians drive cars, live on their smartphones, order through apps, use online stores and social networks via the workarounds we discussed. Young people dress fashionably, follow global trends, sit in the same social apps as the rest of the world, listen to the same music. There's a modern urban culture, coffee shops where people work on laptops, galleries, gyms, malls, food delivery, medicine, transport, communications, all at a fully modern level. Yes, over all of this lies a layer of state restrictions and religious norms, and that creates a peculiar blend of modern life and hard rules. And it's exactly that contrast between contemporary living and strict regulation that startles visitors. But the Middle Ages is anything but the everyday life of an Iranian city dweller. So, living in the Middle Ages is a myth.
Iran is a modern urban country of megacities, smartphones, and fashionable youth, just with an unfamiliar set of restrictions layered on top. Next, attitudes toward Americans, and this one surprises people most of all. Myth number 24. Iranians, to a man, hate Americans and the West. Official slogans and footage of rallies paint a nation breathing hatred for America and the West. And this is where the split between state and people that we keep returning to shows up at its sharpest.
Official state rhetoric in Iran can indeed be fiercely anti-Western and anti-American. That's a fact of political life. But the mood of ordinary Iranians is a completely different story, and it stuns many people. Iranian society is considered one of the most pro-Western and pro-American in the entire Middle East, at the level of ordinary people. This gap is nowhere clearer than in the contrast between the slogans and the encounters. Harsh anti-Western rhetoric may thunder from the podiums, while on the street of that same city, an American or European tourist is surrounded by warm, curious locals who invite them for tea, delight in a guest from the West, ask about their life, and want a photo. Many Iranians say outright that their grievances are with politics, not with the peoples of other countries, and that they love Western culture. Which is exactly why observers have long noted that in ordinary people's warmth toward the West and toward Americans in particular, Iran stands out against some of its supposedly Western-aligned neighbors. Here, the state and the society look in opposite directions. So, "they all hate the West" is a myth that confuses government slogans with the feelings of living people.
On a human level, Iran is one of the most West-friendly countries in the region. Next, the sheer scale of the country. Myth number 25. Iran is a small, insignificant country. Somewhere on the mental map, Iran sits as something small and secondary. Time to redraw that map. Because in size and weight, Iran is a genuine heavyweight.
By area, Iran is one of the largest countries in the world, around 17th, and noticeably bigger than any country in Western Europe. Several of them would fit inside it. Its population is over 80 million, one of the most populous in the region. This is an ancient civilization with colossal cultural weight and one of the key powers of the entire Middle East, shaping the politics of a vast region. To make the scale land, a couple of comparisons. Iran is larger than France, Germany, Spain, and Italy combined. Its population is bigger than that of any single European country. And that maritime choke point Iran controls, the Strait of Hormuz, is the narrow passage through which roughly a fifth of all the oil shipped by sea in the world passes. That alone keeps the country a permanent character in global economic news. Add an ancient civilization, huge energy reserves, a large army, and homegrown military technology, and you have the portrait of a front-rank regional power, not a small, insignificant country. So, small and insignificant is a myth that badly underrates reality. Iran is a huge, populous, ancient, and geopolitically pivotal power of its region. Next, whether all Iranians are alike. Myth number 26. All Iranians are the same. We casually say Iranians, imagining a single people. In fact, Iran is a multi-ethnic, multilingual country, a true mosaic of peoples. Persians are the largest group, and their culture and language form the country's core. But alongside them live dozens of other peoples, together making up nearly half the population. The scale of this diversity is often underestimated. Iranian Azerbaijanis, and there are a great many of them, by some estimates up to a quarter of the population, are Turkic-speaking, and their native tongue is nothing like Persian. Yet they are fully integrated into Iranian society, and some of the country's top leaders come from among them. Then there are the Kurds in the west, the Baluch in the southeast, Arabs by the Gulf, Turkmen in the north, the Caspian Gilaki and Mazandarani, each with their own language, dress, music, cuisine, and sometimes their own branch of religion. Persian ties everyone together as the common state language, but at home many speak their own. So an Iranian is more a citizenship of a multi-ethnic power than a single ethnicity. So all Iranians are the same is a myth.
Iran is a multinational power, a mosaic of Persians, Azerbaijanis, Kurds, Lurs, Arabs, Baluch, and others. Next, what these peoples eat. Myth number 27. Iranian food is just kebab. Outside Iran, Persian cuisine often gets reduced to skewered meat, the kebab. Kebab is genuinely famous and beloved, but it's just the tip of one of the richest, most refined cuisines in the world.
The heart of Iranian cooking isn't grilled meat at all, but complex, fragrant dishes simmered for hours. Let me name a few so you grasp the range. The national dish is a thick stew heavy with fresh herbs, beans, meat, and dried lime, braised for hours. There's a festive dish of chicken in a sauce of ground walnuts and pomegranate syrup, sweet and sour, deep like nothing else. There's that rice crust from the bottom of the pot, crisp and golden, and there's a polite battle at the table over it. There's a hearty noodle and herb soup, dozens of rice dishes with fruit and nuts, sweets scented with rosewater, pistachio, and saffron, and of course, the cult of tea, sipped from little glasses all day long. Kebab is just one note in this orchestra, so only kebab is a myth. Persian cuisine is one of the world's great cuisines, refined, aromatic, and astonishingly varied.
8 myths left, and they fill in the whole picture. whether all Iranians are poor and dying to flee. What's really going on with the carpets, the freedom and Western culture, and where this ancient country is headed next? If you've made it this far, you already understand Iran better than 9 people out of 10. Let's push to the end. Myth number 28. All Iranians are poor. Sanctions and economic hardship create the image of a uniformly destitute country. Iran's economic problems are real and serious, but everyone's poor is a flattening that erases both the middle class and the country's internal contrasts.
Start with the honest part. Iran has spent years under some of the heaviest international sanctions, and it hits the economy hard. High inflation, a collapsing currency, youth unemployment, rising prices. Many families genuinely struggle. Living standards for a large share of the population have fallen, and that's a pain that can't be brushed aside. It's worth understanding the mechanism, too. Years of sanctions cut Iran off from part of the global financial system, crashed the value of the national currency, and drove up inflation. Prices climb, savings evaporate, and the young especially lack jobs. But sanctions bite unevenly. Part of society, educated city dwellers, professionals, people tied to non-oil business or to the diaspora, maintains a perfectly decent standard of living. In northern Tehran, there are neighborhoods with expensive homes, cars, and restaurants that give up nothing to Western ones. So this isn't universal destitution, but a society under heavy pressure, with a widening gap between those who are holding on and those who are truly struggling. So, all Iranians are poor is a myth. More accurately, an economy under fierce pressure from sanctions and inflation, with real hardship for many, and at the same time, a large middle class and a stark internal inequality. Next, the most famous Iranian object of all. Myth number 29. Persian carpets are just tourist souvenirs. Many people see a rug from Iran as an ordinary tourist trinket. In reality, the Persian carpet is an ancient high art and one of the central symbols of an entire civilization. Persian carpet weaving goes back thousands of years and is recognized the world over as the pinnacle of the craft. A real Persian carpet is knotted by hand over months, the most intricate ones over years, with hundreds of thousands and even millions of knots, and its patterns carry symbolism, regional traditions, whole stories. Such carpets aren't floor mats but works of art, passed down through generations, collected, displayed in museums, and worth as much as a car or more. To grasp the level, quality is measured by density, the number of knots per unit of area, and in the finest pieces, that density is phenomenal, while work on a single one can take master weavers more than a year. Whole cities, Tabriz, Kashan, Isfahan, Kerman, have been famous for centuries for their schools, each with its own recognizable pattern, palette, and hand. One of the oldest surviving dated carpets in the world comes from here and hangs in a major world museum. The art of the Persian carpet is inscribed on the lists of humanity's intangible heritage. So, just a souvenir is a myth that belittles one of humanity's greatest crafts. The Persian carpet is art, heritage, and Iranian pride all at once. Next, violence and guns. Myth number 30. Iran is full of violence, and everyone carries a gun. Out of the general image of a dangerous Middle East comes a picture of a country crawling with armed men and violence. The reality of daily life flatly contradicts it. Private gun ownership for ordinary citizens is tightly restricted in Iran. This is not a country where people walk around armed, and the level of street, everyday violent crime here is low. As we said about safety, Iranian cities are considered calm, and travelers note precisely a sense of safety rather than threat. The ordinary Iranian lives a peaceful life in which guns and violence play no part. The contrast with the news image is especially sharp here. In a country the outside world pictures as a powder keg, An ordinary family strolls through the park in the evening. Kids play in the street. And the biggest threat to a visiting tourist is being invited for tea a third time that day. Everything that makes the news, protests, regional conflicts, military rhetoric, belongs to the level of high politics, which has little to do with the ordinary street of an ordinary Iranian city. Mixing the two is like judging a whole country's safety from footage of a political rally.
So, violence everywhere and everyone armed is a myth. Civilian guns are restricted, street crime is low, and daily life is peaceful. Now, the final block. What Iranians supposedly want and where the country is headed. Myth number 31. Every Iranian is desperate to flee the country. Stories of emigration create the image of a nation where everyone thinks of nothing but escape. The reality is more complex and more human.
The honest part. Educated people leaving for abroad is a real and painful problem for Iran, the so-called brain drain. Because of economic hardship, sanctions, restrictions, and a lack of prospects, many talented Iranians, especially the young and skilled, do leave, and Iran loses some of its best minds. It's worth putting numbers to it because it really is dramatic. By international estimates, Iran ranks year after year among the world's leaders for educated people leaving the country. The count runs into the tens of thousands, sometimes 100,000 professionals a year. That's a huge loss, and its root is the economy and the lack of opportunity, not a lack of love for the homeland. Because everyone dreams of escape is the oversimplification. Tens of millions of Iranians live in their country, love it, and have no plans to leave. Iranians are a people with colossal pride in their history, culture, language, and land. The love of homeland here is powerful, even among those who criticize their government. Many draw a clear line. You can be unhappy with the authorities and still love your country with all your heart and want to live in it. Even émigrés often keep a deep tie to home. Almost every one of them talks about missing Iran, the family, the food, the language, Nowruz, and many dream of going back if conditions change. So, everyone wants to flee is a myth. The brain drain is real, but most Iranians live at home, love their country, and distinguish anger at the government from love of the homeland. Next, knowledge of the outside world. Myth number 32. Western culture is completely banned in Iran, and no one there knows it. Since the state is anti-Western and censors everything, it seems Iranians must be cut off from world culture and living in the dark. In fact, Iranians are among the most clued in about Western culture in the whole region. Officially, much is restricted. Foreign social networks are blocked. Western films and music don't get open release. Satellite dishes are formally forbidden. But in practice, all of it is routinely bypassed. The symbol of that workaround is the satellite dish. Officially, they're banned, and the authorities periodically raid rooftops and pull them down, and Iranians put up new ones. So the dishes keep hanging in clusters on buildings all over the country, pulling in dozens of foreign channels, including Persian-language broadcasts from abroad. Through those, and through the internet with its blocks circumvented, Iranians watch Hollywood films and World Series, follow sports, music, and fashion. Urban youth navigate global pop culture no worse than their Western peers. So you get the paradox of a closed country, officially a wall, but in reality one of the most well-watched, well-informed societies in the region. So, no one knows Western culture is a myth. Iranians know and actively consume world culture, routing around the official bans. Next, freedom in general. Myth number 33. There's no freedom whatsoever in Iran, in anything. There's an image of Iran as total unfreedom, where nothing is allowed anywhere. The restrictions are real and serious, but here too the picture is more layered than a flat nothing is allowed.
Honestly, about the main thing, political and civil freedoms in Iran are indeed heavily restricted. There's censorship, a mandatory dress code, limits on speech and assembly. Criticizing the top leadership is dangerous, and protests are suppressed. These are real, heavy restrictions on the public sphere that can't be brushed aside. And it's precisely because of them that tension periodically flares.
But the key to understanding Iran is the split between public and private. On the street, strict rules apply. Behind the door of one's own home, Iranians have a life that's quite free. This gap between the street and the home is the single most important key to understanding Iran, and it's worth feeling. The same woman who puts on a scarf and follows the rules stepping outside takes it off at home, puts on her favorite music, welcomes guests around a laid table with homemade wine, and lives completely freely. The home in Iran is sovereign territory the state barely enters, and that's where real life is concentrated. The arguments, the laughter, the music, the freedom of opinion. Foreigners invited into Iranian homes are often struck by how different the atmosphere is from the strict street. It's as if there are two countries divided by the threshold of an apartment. So no freedom whatsoever is a two-sided myth. Public freedom is tightly constrained, that's true. But behind closed doors, there's a whole world of private freedom. Next to last, the country's biggest holiday. Myth number 34. The main Iranian holiday is Islamic. Since Iran is an Islamic republic, it seems logical that its main holiday would be religious, Muslim. And here lies one of the loveliest surprises. The most important Iranian celebration has nothing to do with Islam at all.
Iran's main, most beloved, most sweeping holiday is Nowruz, the Persian New Year. And it comes from the Zoroastrian pre-Islamic tradition. It's several thousand years old. Nowruz is celebrated on the day of the spring equinox at the awakening of nature, a festival of spring, renewal, and life. People prepare in advance, do a deep house cleaning, set a special table with 7 symbolic items, visit relatives, give gifts, and rest for nearly 2 weeks. The festive table itself is deeply symbolic and worth describing.
A special cloth is laid with 7 items whose Persian names begin with the same letter, each standing for something. Sprouted greens for rebirth, an apple for beauty and health, garlic for protection, and so on. It's all about spring, renewal, life, not religion. The jumping over bonfires on the last Wednesday before the holiday goes straight back to the Zoroastrian reverence for fire as a purifying force. And Nowruz isn't only Iranian. Peoples from the Caucasus to Central Asia celebrated. Hundreds of millions who inherited the ancient Persian tradition. It's a holiday that unites a whole cultural world, above all religions and borders. So the main holiday is Islamic is a myth. The heart of the Iranian calendar is Nowruz, an ancient pre-Islamic festival of spring that proves how alive the pre-Islamic Persian heritage still is. And now, the final myth, the country's future. Myth number 35. Iran is stuck forever in isolation and in the past. We've come to the master image that all the others grow from. Iran as a country frozen solid, doomed to live forever in isolation and in the past. And it may be the most deceptive of them all. Yes, today Iran is heavily isolated by sanctions, and the state clings to hardline foundations. In that sense, the stagnation is real. But under that crust, the country churns and changes. And you have to grasp the demographics because they're the real engine. The median Iranian is only around 30, a nation of the young, raised in the digital age, connected to the wider world through the very workarounds we discussed. This generation is more educated and more plugged in than any before it, and its aspirations don't always line up with the official course. It's precisely from that gap between a young, modern, ambitious society and rigid foundations that the constant internal tension arises. the kind that keeps breaking to the surface. A country like this cannot be frozen forever. Beneath the crust, it's in non-stop motion, however that motion ends up resolving. So stuck forever in the past is a myth. Behind the outward stillness is a young, educated, globally connected country in a state of constant internal tension and change. 35 myths behind us. And if they share one common root, it sounds like this. Almost every one confuses the state with the people, the headline with reality, and takes a single grim detail and passes it off as an entire ancient civilization. We judge Iran by the evening news, and we almost always miss the 80 million living human beings. The real Iran turns out to be older, more cultured, more educated, more hospitable, and more contradictory than any cliché. It has real, heavy problems, which we've named honestly, and it has a colossal heritage and a warm, You made it to the end, so now you see this country far more clearly than most. Tell me in the comments which myth surprised you most, and suggest which country to break down in the next episode. We'll do it the same way, right to the last myth.